The time is 6:03. We have the presence of a quorum, and this meeting has been duly called, and notice of the meeting has been given in the time and manner required by law. First item of business is information items, and the first one of those is the Audit Committee update. Mr. Rice, could you please share that with us?
Thank you, Madam President, and members of the board and the public. You may recall that the Board of Trustees voted to hire Gibson Consulting in 2013 to prepare a risk assessment of our overall audit requirements. In addition to a financial audit, which is prepared every year, there are other audits and compliance audits as well as non-compliance audits that really need to be performed to make sure that we have aligned our audit resources with the district's higher risk areas, facilitate commitment of senior administration and management, and demonstrate board oversight of this process. In May of last year, and I draw your attention to Gibson's, you may not recall it, but they identified probably 15 different audits that they proposed to do over a 3-year period. In May of last year, the board voted to eliminate the internal auditor function and outsource this work to consulting firms that are guided by an audit committee. The audit committee is comprised of 3 trustees assigned by the board president, and for fiscal year 2014-15, President Grail James appointed me to serve as the chair, Kristen Tasson, and herself. So the 3 of us are serving on the audit committee. And since the risk assessment audit was completed, we've retained Gibson Consulting again to conduct a number of audits on behalf of the board. And for fiscal year 2014-15, they have completed or are in the process of completing the following audits. One is purchasing and accounts payable audit. That is now complete. The construction audit, which is also complete, and copies of those were handed out to you by Jane, so you have them now for your review. A payroll audit, which is underway. It's scheduled for completion in July of this year. And a follow-up audit is underway on the student information systems, which is scheduled for completion in April. The completed purchasing, accounts payable audit and construction audits have been given to you, as I mentioned. I'm not sure if you have the administration's responses, but we'll make sure that you get those so you can review and compare them both. Gibson will be here next week to give a brief presentation on that. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me or the administration. And I have an information item and then also a request. In performing these 2 audits, the purchasing accounts payable audit and the construction audit, Gibson had provided us with a guaranteed maximum price. They base their fee on an hourly basis. And whenever they send in an invoice, they provide copies of the hours spent. When making their initial presentation to the audit committee for the purchasing, accounts payable, and the construction audit, they noted that their cost for purchasing and accounts payable came in under their original budget. But the cost for the construction audit exceeded their guaranteed maximum budget. So their guaranteed maximum price for the purchasing and accounts payable audit was $56,000. They came in under by $7,331.25. The construction audit GMP was $40,000, and they were over the number of hours, $13,574.44. So they have asked us if we would agree to transfer the $7,300 to their construction audit, which would make up part of the difference. They would still be short about, $6,000 or so. But the combined cost of $96,000 would not be exceeded. So the audit committee agreed to do that. And one of the reasons that we wanted to get the construction audit done was because the bond is passed, and they had a very good audit, which you'll see, a lot of good best practice recommendations, which the administration is instituting, and I'm sure they will report on when they give us an update on how the bond program is proceeding. But that's an item of information for you. But as we conclude this fiscal year and look to the future, there are many remaining audits planned over the next 2 to 3 years. And the number of audits that are performed each year are really limited to the total budget that we have established for internal auditing, the risk to Fort Bend ISD, and the capacity of the administration and the audit committee to participate in and manage the audits. So some audits that have been identified to be accomplished over the next 2 to 3 years include security and monitoring, technology, transportation, risk management, special education, facilities and operations, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And working with Gibson, the audit committee has preliminarily identified the following audits to be performed for next year: human resources and security and monitoring. But because of the number of these audits, the elapsed time that is entailed with each of these audits, and the intense nature of managing the audits and following up on the administration's response, the audit committee is requesting that Gibson Consulting provide a program manager to assist us in this endeavor. And I've asked them for a fee proposal. They've given us one for the balance of this year of $10,000, which would increase their total guaranteed maximum fee for this fiscal year 14 to 15 from $181,000 to $191,000. So the current budget amount for internal audits that we are carrying in this year's budget is $243,802. So after charging the $191,000 against this budget, the balance will be $52,802. We'll end the year in the black in this area. So the audit committee is asking for board approval of this request, and but it's our opinion we really need someone to help us with this procedure, this process. So that is the extent of our report. Again, you have the payment and procurement audit and the construction audit, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, what exactly would this person be doing? I mean, sitting with you guys during your meetings, or?
Sitting with us during the meetings and helping us answer audit or understand what the audit is actually saying to us. We're not internal auditors, and sometimes the information is presented somewhat dryly. And so if we were flying a plane and someone called you up and said, well, you're about to run out of gas, in a real calm, unemotional voice, you might not get it. And so we want to make sure we don't run out of gas while we're still flying. So that's what we need. We need somebody to help us interpret what the audit is actually saying. There's a fair amount of administrative work that needs to be done with this. And because we have audits, some audits occur annually, some audits occur every 2 to 3 years, and some audits occur every 5 years. And so we're going to be meeting on a quarterly basis, and there's just so much going on, it's hard for us as volunteers to keep a continuous thread of knowledge of all these audits and to get them queued up for the following year, to get them properly budgeted, which we're going to be doing here. I think Mr. Bassett's actually going to be talking about that tonight as we prepare the budget for next year, and to make sure that when we meet and we meet with the administration, and then they comment, they come back. They may, take a while to respond, that we're actually following up on that. It doesn't do us any good to have an audit and then we just meet and say, well, wasn't that nice, and there's no follow-up. So that's part of what we want this person to do, to help us with that. We're all just busy, so that's why. Any other questions? Mrs. Bailey?
Are we still going to try to hire someone, or do we feel contracting's better?
We are still looking for an internal auditor. Mr. Spears is still looking for an internal auditor. They've proven hard to find, frankly.
So we posted a position again, I think it was March 26th, March 28th. And so far, we've had 9 applicants, and 3 we are going to interview. We're going to try to get them in either this week or next week, and hopefully we can find at least 2 good candidates out of those 3.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking dollars here. Is it cheaper to go the consulting way, like what Mr. Rice was talking about? Or, Mr. Rice, are you still recommending to hire the internal auditor?
Well, I don't know. We are looking for an internal auditor. Should we find one between now and the end of this fiscal year, we have the funds remaining to pay their salary for the end of this year. It have to be budgeted for as we go forward. I think we'll just have to defer answering that until after they have done the interviews of the 9 candidates and see what, I hate to say it like this, what turns up. Then we'll meet with the audit committee. We'll meet and look and see what we think. We've interviewed 3 or 4 people already, and just declined to hire any of them. And in addition to that, Mr. Spears has given us resumes on several more that we looked at and declined to interview. So I'll just say that we'll have to wait to answer that question until after we see what turns up. But we think this is a good interim thing. If we're unable to find someone, it might prove to be more cost efficient. I don't know, because we're really only talking about hiring one person, and one person can't do that much internal auditing. So we didn't really know about this program manager type role before until Gibson proposed it. And the main thing that we really want is someone that understands auditing and can answer our questions so we're fully informed.
Mr. Rice, one of the things that you mentioned was you talked about the $10,000 for the program manager, and would that be, is that something we need to, you mentioned that we needed to approve it. I'm not sure if we really do or not, or if you're just informing us that that's the situation.
Well, I'm not sure either. Mr. Morris has been out of town on vacation, and we've been unable to get a firm answer on that, but I'm lifting it up here tonight for the board to certainly, this falls under the $50,000 threshold for the superintendent to incur or approve, but we did not want to do that without making the board aware of it and asking basically for your approval. If everyone here is okay with us doing that, we'll just do it. And if you'd rather put it to a vote, I'll have to ask President James to put it on the agenda for next week.
Okay, so I guess I would defer to Mr. Lamp. If he feels it needs to be on the agenda for us to approve, we can bring that back next week. Otherwise, I think we go forward with what the audit committee suggests. Can you please use a microphone for that comment? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be brought back for another agenda item.
Really want to get this part on the recording.
I mean, if I'm on, particularly if it's within the superintendent's authority, the dollar amount
Right.
for that to be approved, I don't think that would separately need to be brought to the board for a vote at another meeting.
Great. Thank you, sir. All right. Anything else, Mr. Rice?
No, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, let's continue on then. Our next item is Agenda Item 2B, the legislative update. Dr. Dupree?
Yes, ma'am. We have got two items that Mr. Bassett's going to take care of, kind of wrapped into one, the legislative update and our 15-16 budget development update. Steve?
All right, thank you, sir. And I have Ms. Edgar here to help me, Ms. James, members of the board, Dr. Dupree. Okay, relatively brief presentation. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about a legislative update here. It is on. Whoa, fancy. All right. Okay. All right, so I mean, purely from a financial perspective, if the way current law is set up right now, and what we're seeing in the main bills, House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2, they're calling for full foundation school program funding, which, unlike had happened before, this also includes the new enrollment. So whenever they were having, significant cuts, one of the ways that they passed on the significant cuts was by not funding for enrollment. Well, they do have enrollment accounted for in the plan. Right now, in this bill, they have in those two bills, they have no increase to the basic allotment. We do think something will happen in that area, but right now, what we're modeling is the no increase to the basic allotment. I'll tell you some more about that later. One thing that's in the current law, which helps us, is the increase of the Austin yield. The Austin yield helps make the pennies that we have above $1 worth more. Okay, and it's not just for us; it's for every district that has those golden pennies, those pennies between $1 and $1.04, and then also those districts that have gone above the $1.04, the amount of state aid goes up. For us, that means it's approximately $4 million. That's offset, however, by the loss of the funding of the TRS supplement. I've spoken about that before, the TRS supplement that they charged us for this year. Both of those things, as you go along, will go up. Will they go up about the same rate? Well, it's hard to tell. But right now, the Austin yield is a little bit less than what we're losing on the TRS rider. But long story short, from our perspective, and especially for this briefing, any increases in funding for us is really being fueled by our property values and then also the increasing enrollment. Okay, so we think on the state side we'd be breaking even, except for the fact that we're going to be expecting more enrollment, and then we have the higher property values. All right. Okay, so other major areas of interest, and it's my understanding, the board will be attending some legislative activities, during the week, and so it'll be good for you to get a feel for what's happening in Austin. But it's been my experience and Dr. Dupree's experience, and we spoke about this recently. You're going to hear a lot of things in January, and February, and March about all the bills that are going through and all of these topics here. And really, when you're paying attention to these things as things go along, especially toward the end of April, that's when, if something has legs, that's really when you can start seeing things and things will start taking shape. But all of these topics are really being talked about. The early education, the pre-K initiatives. I think there's going to be something that's going to happen there. Tax relief is a big issue, especially for the Senate. And as I mentioned before, I do think that there's ample revenue to do something along those lines. But that certainly seems to be a priority for the administration. The instructional material allotment, we do expect that to change. I mean, there's some stuff, with regard to how it's tied to the permanent school fund, which will affect us in a positive manner to the tune of, I think, 35 to 40% of an increase in that. And again, that's if the rules don't change. And so, if anything does change, I think it'll be even to the better. On the downside, there's a lot of concern not about TRS from from a defined benefit pension plan, but there's a lot of concern about TRS care, the medical side of things, and legislatures need to address that. And will they pass some of that on to the districts? You know, who knows? They pass a lot of things on to the districts. I hope they pass them on to only the districts that are in TRS care. But anyway, we'll have to see what happens there. There's always something in the paper about vouchers and choice, and there was some more on that. A lot with regard to debt transparency, any legislation on there. And so we'll have to see what happens on that. Some saying you can only have those elections in November, others dictating, what else would be on the ballot. They're always tweaking those. Fund balance transparency, that's a topic, and I think that'll, by the time the special session comes around, I think our fund balance strategy to have that 1 month of fund balance set aside as an amount for state revenue, I think will help us in terms of how we get analyzed compared to other districts. And then there's a lot with regard to accountability, not just with regard to achievement school districts and low-performing campuses, but accountability. And one of the bills in here that's out there is with regard to our district itself potentially being a pilot district to move away from state testing and to just be on national testing. And whether or not that has legs, we'll see, and you guys can ask about that this week when you attend. So, but again, we'll be giving you information as we go along. We'll have hopefully more information for you in April. Toward the end of February and into early March, with a lot of the school districts going on spring break, Mo Casey isn't updating things at the same rate as they were before, but I definitely think I'm going to have some more information for you in the April briefing. Okay. Any questions on this before I move along?
Yes, on voucher and choice legislation, do you have an idea of what the state intends to create in a voucher allotment? How much money are we talking about?
I'm not versed enough to really be able to address that. If you want me to do some research on that, we can.
How much is the state giving us per student, average weighted WADA?
Well, the average, it's just above 5,000. Okay,
It's the 5,000.
Roughly, for these kinds of discussions, 5,000 per student is where we're at in terms of the combination of, local and state. But again, we already know what we're collecting locally, and so marginally, those next students that come in, the next students that move into the district, the state is picking up that full tab for those additional kids.
Well, is there a chance that the state will give more than 5,000? Will we have to make up more than that?
There's a chance for anything along those lines, sure.
Okay.
But how likely? I still don't think that anything major would pass on this, but
Right.
that's just me.
Two more questions. Fund balance transparency. What does LBB focus mean?
Legislative Budget Board is that's what that acronym stands for, and I know that they're looking at ways to assist the legislature in doing analysis for the fund balances that the school districts carry. There's always been a discussion among the more conservative legislative members on, well, hey, if they have that much in their fund balances, can't they do something with that to make things easier on the state? And so, I think that's the gist of that. Do you have anything to add to that, Dina?
No, that's good.
Okay.
Achievement school districts, does it look like it's going to go forward with that and not with our recommendation? And if so, who's going to pay for it?
That's a good question. We don't really have any definitive information on those. There's a number of different bills that conflict with each other, and definitely line out different plans. And so, if it is something that they decide to not fund, that would be yet another unfunded mandate that we can add to a long list of unfunded mandates. But I think hopefully you'll get a better feel this week. I don't know, Dr. Whitbeck, if you have anything to add. But we get sent legislative briefings, legislative stuff from several consultants, including Casey and Associates, and there were over 6,500 bills that were filed on both sides of the House, And so they're, at least that day is over. They can't add more bills. And so, you know, the process is going to see which ones are going to survive.
Thank you.
Mrs. Tassan?
I don't have a question, but I have a couple of comments. One of the bills that's out there, it's not a voucher bill, it's a tax credit bill. It's House Bill 1043. So you guys might want to look that up before you go. And it doesn't have an amount listed that I can tell, but it talks about providing tax credits for students that attend private schools. So that's one you can read up on and maybe learn a little bit. I don't see amounts, but they're at least eligible for that. The pilot program bill is House Bill 3583. So that's one you definitely want to look at and talk to the legislators about. And just an FYI, another one that's kind of near and dear to my heart is House Bill 3192, and that's, I think I discussed that in our last board meeting, that would allow students in special education that need modifications in an endorsement class, they would still be allowed to receive credit for that endorsement. So that's one that's being looked at as well.
All right, do we have any other questions? All right, Mr. Bassett?
Okay. All right, so let's change gears here. Let's talk about our property value growth. And so I'm still learning and developing a relationship with Glenn Whitehead, our chief appraisal officer, the head of the appraisal district for the county. And so, you know, I've been talking to him over the past few months. And, you know, in comparison to what they're talking about with regard to other districts and some of the initial numbers we got from him, what we think a reasonable number to use right now is a percentage growth amount is 11.5%, okay? Which is still, I mean, which is very high. And so instead of just kind of looking at this graph, while this graph is good, I do think that it's better to look at things on a percentage change basis, okay? So you can, you know, it's better reflect kind of the cycles and how things are going, and hopefully to help, if we go back, and we're going to try to do some research to see what we can find in even earlier years in order to help us predict, you know, what would happen. You know, I want to see, you know, what happened whenever oil had a major dip before. You know, I want to compare this with some of the changes in that. You know, obviously you had the amounts from the last downturn in 2000, you know, in 2009 and 10, you know, causing us to be negative. And, you know, that was more of a national thing. So this kind of graph, I think, will just help us do some analysis with regard to trying to put together where can we expect to be the next year or two. So I do think this is kind of a new view for you. So anyway, we're going to be looking at that, and definitely in this time of uncertainty with regard to, you know, our economics and everything, we'll be looking at this, and we'll be trying to give you a perspective on what we might be able to expect in the next cycle, okay?
I have a question,
Yes,
Mr. Bassett, sorry.
That's all right.
I'm remembering last year when we did this.
Hmm?
What was the early CAD appraisal percentage then?
I mean, I think if memory serves, I think it was 6 or 7, I think. We ended up at 9.8 in terms of the certified value.
What did we base our budget on at the time?
At the time, whenever we put the budget together, it was in between 9 and 10, I think 9.5.
Well, that's showing 8.62%. Is that?
Yeah, I can comment on that. Bless you.
Bless you.
It depends on what value to value you're looking at year over year. We get certified values from the Central Appraisal District in July. So if you look at July, that's where we start, and then the values grow throughout the year. You have your under review people disputing their values, and then as they argue and those become resolved, we gain property. So if you're looking at July, this particular view is near final. So it's at the end of the year, and it will vary from your CAD certified, which tends to be more conservative.
Okay, I appreciate that. One more question. Is this CAD value, are we doing this in arrears? Are we doing the CAD value as we base the budget going forward? It's based on last year's total appraisal. Is that what we do?
Well, this particular view is an estimate of tax year 14, of how we think we're going to end the year, because it's very important that you take a space and time to a space and time when you're comparing. So you would either look at July certified to July certified, which this is not. This is near final, an estimated of tax year 14 to tax year 15, and that's what the 11.5 is based on.
Okay.
The
All
other,
right.
the other view you can look at is the CPTD value, which is the comptroller value, and that comes out in January for the prior tax year. So this particular January, we would have received comptroller value for tax year 14, and that one is kind of in the rears.
Okay, all right.
And just to add to that, I mean, what's interesting is that actually this district, the way this district has reported the property values in the CAFR, instead of going with the appraisal district numbers, which are really a moving target, you know, because of the disputment process, okay, because of that, it is a moving target, and there's always, you know, properties being added and such. This district actually has elected to always just report the CPTD values because it's the point in time. But the estimate of what this number at is what we should be basing our budget on.
Okay.
So we're kind of taking a different tact in that regard that I do think is going to be more conservative for us.
Thank you.
All right. Enrollment's the next big piece, obviously, okay? And so, you know, so just a reminder, last year with PASS's first attempt at doing the demographics for our schools, their projection was 72,317. The amount ended up for snapshot at 72,183, and so they missed that by 0.19%, which I thought was, you know, very good overall from a district perspective. You know, again, campus to campus, we had some issues, grade levels, you know, with issues, but, you know, overall, and which is the way we're setting up our budget overall, I think, you know, they do a very good job. The estimate being used right now, the one that was being used to help put the staffing figures together that we used for our recommendations on staffing is for 73,377, okay? We've been adding kids all during the year, so I do think that we'll get there.
I have a question.
Sure.
So did we look at, I know campus to overall, it's, you know, looks like not much of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Campus to campus, did they go back and look at what the issues were at those campuses so that we could
Oh,
moving
definitely.
forward?
I mean, they know that was an issue for us, and because, I mean, it definitely affected our staffing, and it caused us to add a lot of staff at the beginning of the year. They want to do, you know, a great job all the way through. You know, the wild card this year will be the feeder patterns and the boundaries.
Right.
And so, you know, I'm hoping that even with that information, you know, they still are able to do a better job, you know, than last year. But I don't see them being really tight until another year or two from now, you know, until all those things kind of settle out.
Because I studied the staffing specifics, the details that you guys gave us, and so that was one of my concerns, given the issues that we had last year with that. Have they taken a harder look after we went through the realignment process and the rezoning process, or are these numbers after that or before that?
These numbers are after that, and this is actually why we're tardy, what I would think, tardy in coming in with some of the staffing numbers.
Okay.
Okay. What we'd like to be able to get to the point is that we're getting information for the demographer in the November, early December timeframe, and that it's fine. Okay. I think even with some of the other districts, they even do it a little bit earlier than that. But we'd like to be able to have a handle on that before the end of the year, before the end of the calendar year. And so, but they had to wait, and we didn't get anything from them until, you know, I mean, 2.5 weeks after the board approved the changes. Now, they were working on them, but again, there were changes, you know, up to the you know, just a few days before. Okay, Max, are they going to be presenting at all, or? Sorry.
Yes, sir, I believe that's coming up in April, at the April meeting, yes.
And so, and obviously any question for them is fair game. All righty. Okay, so with that in mind, this is the initial recommendation from the campus formulas, adding 15 and a half teaching positions, 4.5 other campus professional positions, a decrease on 2 campus paraprofessionals for 18. Now, again, you may think, well, gosh, you're adding these kids. Why aren't these numbers higher? And the reason why is because we had to add a fair amount of staff at the beginning of the year to not have as many class waivers and to really account for a lot of the changes. So, I mean, this year we have been overstaffed, but we did have a budget. We were budgeted in such a way where we could absorb that, and we have. And so, anyway, that's why these numbers aren't as significant, and it's really pretty close to what we were, what I was just estimating that they would be, and so it turned out that way. And so one of the other things that we're going to look at is again, because we want to be aware of some of the pluses and minuses that are going on out there, and so if a campus has had an allocation before, we want to take a look at, we're going to go through a more formal process, some of the E-team members, where we kind of, besides just having the staffing guidelines, we want to write down some guidelines for, I'll just give you an example. So let's say a elementary gets another AP at, let's say 800, okay? Well, let's say they already had it, but these guidelines would say that, well, they're 50 under, so we're going to take it away. Well, we want to write down some procedures so that we can say, okay, what is the demographer saying for the next year? Do we want to pull that for 1 year? Well, no, we don't want to do the yo-yo thing with these folks, for lack of a better word. And so we're going to take a look at that, and I'm going to get together with Christy and Phyllis and Kermit, probably the 4 of us. We'll try to put together some procedures for us to follow. And so depending on how that shakes out, we've been intending to bring some additional staffing, especially with regard to special ed and ESL, English second language learners. We'll be bringing that in April. And so if there's other things with regard to this, the yo-yo process, for lack of a better word, we'll be bringing that at that time, okay? But this is where we're at as far as our current planning is concerned with these 18.
I have a question.
Sure.
I know we're going to be talking more about this in the workshop. On those teacher positions, those 15 and a half, how many of those, we have to add Project Lead the Way in our 11 high schools. So of those 15, I'm just going to say 16, are these like, I guess my question is new classes, because we're going to have new classes with Project Lead the Way. So how many this includes?
This doesn't include the Project Lead the Way.
It does not.
You've already taken the action
6.
to approve those.
Yeah.
And it was actually more than that. It was 30. It was 32. Yeah, 32. There were 32 positions.
But 6 of those for the Project Lead the Way engineering in the high schools.
Right, and those are separate from this.
Okay, so this, all right.
Totally separate.
Okay, so then I'll have more questions later on that.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the number of teachers are concerned, I mean, it's really the 15 and a half plus the 32 for Kate, and then so anyway. Anything else before I move to the next assumption slide?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so you have this, on the print in front of you. So the bold items, here are our major assumptions. The bold items are things that we've tweaked on this view. Okay, so the enrollment, is a little bit higher with this passive projection. We're using the 11.5% property value growth. And so we have 62 campus positions in this plan. 18 are new that we'd be bringing for recommendation for approval next week. But you've already approved 12 for elementary 46, and you've already approved 32. So 62 total campus positions. You've approved 10 non-campus, and then we're including right now in the plan 7.5 contingency. I mean, we'll see what happens with special ed and ESL. So we'll see what happens with that. And then right now we're projecting modest salary increase that we have in the plan. Now, we have also a placeholder in here for additional transportation costs associated with grandfathering and feeder pattern changes. Okay, and of course, a lot of those aren't going to be long-term, as kids matriculate through the system, but we have something as a placeholder in that for now. And then as far as the legislative decision, session decision, so, elimination of Rider 71, I mean, we always knew that was going to be in there. We always, had it in. And so, the increase in the Austin yield, because that was in current law, I wanted to put that into this projection. We had in the last time we showed you the projection, the increase in basic allotment. This time I didn't include it because I wanted to show you where we were at, basically, with kind of the worst case, okay? And so that's where I want to show you this. So, again, this is 13-14 actual. We're, really broke even. We feel pretty confident that we'll be breaking even again in 14-15. So in 15-16, even with no new dollars in the basic allotment, and I do think something will come through, where we would be at a deficit of 1.8. So I mean, we're very close to breaking even without any additional new funding. And so if we don't get anything, I do think we'll be able to come in and be able to break even. So we're not far away. So that was the intent of showing it to you that way, without anything new for the basic allotment. I think we'll all have a better feel. We'll see what we learn this week, but definitely as we go into April, we'll have a better feel for what will happen on the legislative side. But from my perspective, there's just too much new revenue to not do anything. I mean, when you're talking about $18 billion over the biennium, and when you're talking about some of the needs, and while Texas has gotten some good press for its the graduation rates, for the minorities and all that, it was really good news. But our spending is still very low in comparison to a lot of the other states. So there is some pressure in that regard. Any questions on this before I move to what's next?
Yes. So I'm looking at the ending balance, the ending fund balance, and it looks like there's a little over 3.5 months of operating. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the other things, I'll just go ahead and mention this since you mentioned fund balance, Mr. Rice. In the future, I'm going to follow this up with another slide that's going to do a little bit more fund balance analysis, where we're going to be looking at what's making up our fund balance and some of the monies that have been set aside in the past, how that'll be used, and we'll be talking about how you'll see us stair-stepping in funds for campuses as we anticipate them opening, and other things. And so you'll be able to see that in a view, and so we'll be showing that in April. But with that regard, you'll see where we need to be from a 3-month perspective. Okay. Anything else on this before I move on? We're almost done. So we have just a couple of slides on where we're headed. So we did just have, we got the workshop, board workshop. The job fair was a great success, but I guess our date is off on that since that was a couple of days ago. So sorry about that. But it was great. I was there. Okay, and then the March 30th is when we're going to ask you for approval of the additional campus staffing for those 18 FTEs. There's going to be a lot going on in April, and so don't be put off by this list, because we'll try to condense it as much as we can. But we'll try to update give you a budget and legislative update again. There'll be contract recommendations from a staffing perspective, right, Kermit? That'll be coming up with regard to non-renewals and some numbers in that regard. If there's additional campus staffing, we'll be bringing at that time some initial discussion on non-staffing requests, and then also the debt service. We'll be sharing with you a debt service update. We will be talking with the Bond Oversight Committee in April about the debt service fund and where we're at on that as well. So then on the April 20th, we have we'll have the approval of the contract recommendations. That's the renewals, non-renewals, terminations. We'll ask for approval on some additional staffing. We'll have to see, what else at that time. But I've, left so special ed, ESL, and then other. And so that's what we'd be asking for action in April. And then in May, hopefully we'll have a lot more clarity from a legislative perspective, If there is any additional staffing, then we'll finalize the compensation as well, and any kind of non-staffing enhancements. And then we'll ask the board to actually call the meetings to take those procedural steps to having the budget adopted in June. Okay, and also the publishing of our truth and taxation information. And that is it. Short and sweet. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Tina.
All right, so we have covered the audit, the legislative update and the budget update. And so next up, we have got an update related to our OCR compliance review and the truancy procedures that we're currently using in our district. As you know, there's a lot of tension in Austin right now related to truancy laws and decriminalizing certain aspects of truancy along with student discipline. And our district has been named in a number of recent articles and editorials and even in some bills in Austin. So we wanted to kind of bring the board up to date on what we're doing in the district to address those things and what we're going to be doing going forward. So our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Christy Whitbeck, along with Dr. Rhonda McWilliams, our current Executive Director of Student Affairs, is going to be presenting that report this evening.
Yes. Well, we're happy to give you an update, and ironically, we know that there's been a lot of media attention on these two topics lately, but ironically, we were planning to give you an update anyway because it's timely. You need to be updated on what's going on with the OCR compliance review. And with truancy, we have an MOU that'll be coming up within the next couple months, and need to inform you about that and talk to you as well as part of this process. But I want to step back for just a moment on these two topics, because tonight you're going to get some data, some examples of progress in our OCR, as well as where we are with truancy. But we also know that we're trying to balance following the law, making sure kids are in school, and making sure we are equitable with how we treat children. But we also know that we have to really have a very listening ear and to become very sensitive and open to our community and to some of the underlying causes that help us with issues in OCR and truancy. So we know that there's a balance there, and we'll be looking for that as we move forward. You move in my little slide, there you go. And of course, it's tied to our mission and our climate and our supportive environment. So as you can see there, we just kind of have a visual to remind us of the importance of those relationships, the engagement, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and how it affects the equity and what we're doing in our schools. I do want to acknowledge Dr. McWilliams and her 18, is that correct years? Is it 18? 18 years of service in Fort Bend ISD in a variety of roles, and that we appreciate her, and this is probably going to be her last board workshop, and I know that as you hear her information, you will also be appreciative of her knowledge base that she has brought to Fort Bend for so many years. So I'll turn it over to her now, as she will share with you the data, and then we'll come back around at the end.
So we'll start with the update on the OCR, the compliance review, and as a reminder that the purpose of the OCR compliance review is to assess whether the district discriminates against African American students by disciplining them more frequently and more harshly than other similarly situated students. Our targeted campuses that were identified by the OCR: high schools Dulles, Elkins, Ridgepoint, and Travis; middle schools Baines, Bowie, Dulles, Quail Valley, and Sugar Land. This thing was initiated in May 2012 as a reminder, and actually the OCR did visit the identified campuses in November of 2012. We have continued to have data requests from the OCR in the 3 years of this ongoing investigation. We have continued to provide board updates and presentations such as this to keep you updated about the OCR review. And the most recent action we have had from the OCR was in the fall. We had online surveys with staff at the identified campuses, of which the OCR has not gotten back to us with the results yet. So if we could talk a minute about student improvement strategies that have been used in 2014 and 15. The Student Code of Conduct, as you know, we update, and you approved it last summer, and we'll do it again this summer. The Department of Student Affairs is in its second year and has continued to provide several services. If you want me to go into any of those, I can. We continue to improve our parent and guardian notification. We set certain expectations, and we continue to improve upon that in terms of discipline. And then we added in January, in-school and out-of-school suspensions must be approved in advance by the principals. Those are handled 99% of the time by assistant principals, and now they have to be approved in advance, ISS and OSS, through the principals. You know, it's important that we all understand that we are not asking teachers and administrators to avoid appropriate disciplinary action just to reduce numbers. We're not saying don't do discipline just to bring down the numbers or anything like that. But we are asking that we look at some improvement strategies.
I do have a question on one of those, if I can interrupt for just a minute. So on the parent guardian notification, you said you guys have made improvements. What do those look like? How are we notifying parents?
Well, every campus administrator has this Bible called the Administrative Guide to Effective Discipline. And it explains to them the length of time that they have to notify a parent in terms of suspension, in-school suspension, of course, any DAEP placements and expulsion hearings. And we're holding them to it. And it does happen from time to time that if that process isn't followed, then I contact the school and we readdress the situation.
Okay, and so are we sending emails and following up with phone calls as well? The reason I'm asking is because I know not every student in the district has access to.
Sure.
You know.
We certainly hope so. What I do accept the expectation of absolutely is parent contact directly of a suspension or a DAEP placement, and we have a time turnaround for that. And if they don't meet that time turnaround for the DAEP, then it can be declined. But so it is primarily the absolute, you got to talk to the parent, you got to talk to them, is suspension and any kind of DAEP or, of course, an expulsion hearing.
Okay, so that's mandatory, is what you're saying?
The parent contact?
Is
Yes, ma'am.
mandatory. Okay.
We continue to have student support initiatives that are listed on this slide. You know that we have champs and foundations, and we have support teams and truancy intervention, and capturing kids' hearts is certainly going on in the Willow Ridge feeder pattern and so forth. I think it's important that we say that these are good programs, but we realize that they have not been implemented with fidelity and consistency at all schools. We realize that champs may be going on very well at some schools and not at others. And so we continue to work on that and admit that we are working on that. We continue to establish systems for more effective implementation of these programs. If you want to stop me or anything, don't hesitate. Let's look at a little bit of data. We hear about the OCR review, and what the OCR continually looks at is ISS and OSS. So let's talk about it. In this particular slide, first of all, I'd like to remind you that we have over 400 more students in our high schools this year. This slide addresses ISS and OSS, in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension for high school students. So we looked at the fall of 2013 and compared it to the fall of 2014, which is our most recent semester that we have the full data on. And the ISS and OSS, even though we increased by 400 kids, are actually down by 782 placements. So in other words, a 12% improvement in the fall. And we expect to see even more improvements this spring. Continuing with the improvements that we've seen in ISS and OSS, we have ISS decreases at 9 of our 11 high schools, as is listed on this slide. I'd like to congratulate the greatest ISS decreases, a 51% decrease at Marshall High School, the fall of 14 as compared to the fall of 13. And Willow Ridge had a 30% decrease in ISS placements. And the good news about this is if they're not suspended or in ISS, they're in the classroom. And so we kind of celebrate those. Out-of-school decreases at 5 of our high schools, Austin, Elkins, Marshall, Travis, and Willow Ridge. And again, the greatest decreases in out-of-school suspensions are Marshall High School had 13% less this fall, and Willow Ridge had 13% less this fall. Now let's take a look at the middle schools. So we have 300 more middle school students this year, but look at the change of 724 less ISS, OSS placements in the fall of 14 as compared to 13. We had ISS decreases in 8 of our middle schools, as listed on this slide. I'd like to congratulate Lake Olympia Middle School. They had the greatest ISS decrease at 51%. I'm always pretty transparent, so I want to just share with you. I called Lake Olympia because I was just so excited about it, and to be honest with you, they spent quite a bit of time in the fall without an ISS monitor. So they Lake Olympia truly looked for other ways of discipline, and it worked. So they decreased their ISSs by 51%. Out-of-school decreases at 8 of our middle schools again, and notice that the greatest out-of-school decrease, 34% difference in this fall as compared to the fall of 13, was at Mo City, 34% decrease. So let's go ahead and talk about then ISS and OSS improvements with African American students. The OCR asked us to look at it, so let's look at it. So if looking at this fall compared to fall of 2013, the decreases in the out-of-school and in-school suspensions with African American students at the identified campuses. And we saw decreases with the African American students at Dulles Middle School, Quail Valley Middle School, Dulles High School, Elkins, and Travis High School. And I think that we should note that Travis High School had the greatest reduction in OSS and ISS assignments of African American students with a 14% reduction. And again, I think that these schools really are looking for different ways to work with kids. We've heard a lot in the news lately about mandatory versus discretionary. So let me talk with you, if you don't mind, a minute about mandatory versus discretionary. So in terms of the mandatory DAEPs, at our high schools, 68% of the ones that we've looked at this year, this is up through the end of January, are mandatory. At our middle schools, 36% are mandatory. So overall, our secondary schools and the elementary DAEPs are not even, they're negligible, the data. But our totals show that 60% of our DAEPs are mandatory. I do want to talk a little bit about discretionary DAEPs. So discretionary DAEPs have to go through me and now through Dr. Carlson in terms of the Department of Student Affairs. And we have procedures that are very well written for how you get a discretionary DAEP, but I wanted to kind of share with you there are the 2 main reasons that I approve a discretionary DAEP. Number 1 is for a fight, and it's often the second or third fight the student has had that year, or it is an incredibly disruptive fight or where someone has been hurt. So the other reason that I approve DAEPs discretionarily is for excessive discipline. And so, you know what? I wanted to actually share with you and redact the names of 2 discretionary DAEPs I approved today. And I'm just going to read from you, and these truly came to me today. Hello, Dr. McWilliams. I would like to request a DAE placement for student at certain school. Despite several conferences with student and his mother, including an RTI concerning his continuous disruptive behavior while on campus and on the bus, he continues to do so. During one recent incident, student got into a fight on the bus. A few weeks earlier, student inappropriately touched a 6th grade female while on the bus. Student is currently off the bus for continuous misbehavior. Student has a total of 33 discipline referrals, 12 since the RTI. I approve that. Those are the kinds of things we approve, excessive discipline. Another one I'd like for you to read, this is today, I wanted you to just hear, because you keep hearing this stuff in the media, what's a discretionary DAEP? Here's another discretionary DAEP today, redacting the names in the schools. Dear Dr. McWilliams, requesting DAEP placement for student. Multiple interventions have occurred. Student, administrator, parent, student administrator, and student teacher administrative interventions and strategies. See, I make them go through all these steps, and so they send me these emails to explain. I've done ISTs, I've done strategies, I've monitored, we've done this, that, and that, and this. We have provided schedule changes, cool-off periods, student, teacher, and administrator daily checkups. Disciplinary consequences thus far, 10 out-of-school suspensions, 1 in-school suspension, 5 detentions, and 2 school-based strategies. I'd like to just read a few of the disciplines of this particular student, which I did approve. Initiated a fight with a student in art class. Told administrator, you don't tell me what to do, shut up. Refuses to follow directions, loud talking over teacher. Initiated fight as semester exams were being passed out. Disrupted final exam environment. And so those are just 2 examples that I wanted to share with you of yes, they're approved and they are discretionary. Most of the DAEPs, as we see on the data, are mandatory. Your mandatory DAEPs, quite frankly, are generally possession of alcohol, possession of controlled substances, and so forth.
I have I have a couple questions before we move on. So what are we doing before or after a DAEP referral or in any discretionary DAEP situation to help the child? What are we doing to determine are we doing anything to determine the cause of the behavior, to look at whether there are mental health issues involved, to basically help remediate where there are behavior problems that can be remediated?
Those are good questions. And often that the discretionary DAEPs, I ask them exactly that. Have you done RTI? Have you considered the possibility of a referral for testing and so forth? So in this book, I'll just give you RTI. You have to go through the RTI process in terms of discretionary DAEP placements. And so you have to provide interventions.
Dr. McWilliams, could you just say for the group what RTI means?
I am so sorry, yes.
That's okay.
Response to intervention. It's a process where you begin to look at the behaviors of the student and see if there are certain helps that we need to give the student. So we have to look at the RTI process. We have to see what level of behaviors the students are displaying. And then we have to say, okay, what kinds of parents' contact have we made? And then they have to show me proof of interventions. In other words, and they're sometimes very simple interventions, but have you contacted the parents? Have you contacted them twice? Have you met with the parents? Have you brought in the counselor? Have you changed the seating? Have you considered a possible teacher change? Those are some kinds of things that we ask. And then not only that, but you've got to put them in place. And we ask that they be put in place for a minimum of 2 weeks and see if it's working, these interventions. And then come back together. And then after you go through all of these, then you can ask for a discretionary DAEP.
Okay, well, that's helpful. So I guess just a comment I would make is that we all know that our RTI process is not really working very well in Fort Bend ISD. So when you're looking at an RTI process, is that something that you go in and personally look at? Do we have other staff that does that? I guess I'm looking from an organizational or a structural perspective, because I know just from personal experience that the RTI process is not being implemented uniformly in all of our campuses or consistently, and we have a lot of problems with RTI. So my concern is that, and I'm in no way excusing behaviors, okay? So I want to say that at the outset. Our teachers deal with a lot in the classroom, and I've witnessed it myself. But I also want to make sure that we don't have kids that are falling through the cracks because our RTI process is not being implemented correctly on a campus. So that's my concern. That's why I'm asking these types of questions. So what does that process look like, and what are we looking for? Are we making sure that the campuses are effectively implementing response to interventions and what those interventions look like, and if those interventions are even appropriate for that particular child?
I will certainly let Dr. Whitbeck address that, but the one thing that I didn't mention is another acronym, and let me share it with you. To get a discretionary DAEP for this buildup of discipline, 30 referrals and whatnot, I require, and it's in the procedures here, that the school hold an IST, an instructional support team meeting. Invite the parent, the counselor, the teacher, and talk about all of these procedures that we're working with these interventions with kids. Okay, so I forgot to kind of throw that other acronym at you, the IST, and the importance of the IST prior to any kind of DAEP discretionarily. Dr. Whitbeck?
No, I was just going to say that, RTI has got the prongs of academic. We're going to respond because the child is having difficulty learning. Then we have the other piece, as Rhonda shared, is that behavior. But really, even without the RTI process, the code of conduct has and continues to have the requirement that you notify the parent, that you've got these interventions in place, and that you're not just simply going to dole out the discipline without thinking through what's happening, talking it through, involving other stakeholders in the building that can assist the child, involving the parent. That's what we expect our principals to do, regardless of whether we had a formal RTI process or not, because that's what the Discipline Code of Conduct requires of us. It even has pieces in there that say parent contact. And so now what's happening at this level is that we're holding the principal to a higher level of accountability by saying, you know, show us the hoops, show us what you've done in order to be able to even consider removing them off your campus, because that's our last resort. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And, you know, my primary concern, and I guess this is just more of a comment, is I really want to make sure that these kids are not falling through the cracks, that even though we have we've got them in a DAEP, that we are working to make sure that interventions are being put in place, that appropriate measures are being taken. And I know, Dr. Whitbeck, you and I attended the, back in, at the United Way, we attended the PBIS. I mean, I'm a big proponent of, there's another acronym, Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. I've said it before. And, you know, I'm a big proponent of it because I think it helps so many students in so many ways. And I know we have some of our CHAMPS programs and things like that, but they're not really PBIS. And so, you know, I guess I have some questions about where we're going in the area of discipline and what that's going to look like. And
That's actually the very next piece.
okay, and
So it's
what
a
our
great segue.
support teams are going to look like, because these, you know, we all know that behaviors are kids usually reaching out for help, and, you know, so I just want to make sure that they're not.
Well, the expectation, to kind of summarize, is that unless it is a mandatory, and remember that a mandatory removal can occur to a child who is a straight A student, who's never had a disciplinary offense in their entire life, and boom, they make a very illegal and wrong decision, and they're removed. And that's the way it goes, and that's out of our hands, and we do follow that. But for the children that we can intervene, we do as much as possible. And that's the expectation, that the campus do that. So I know that Dr. Hill's team, that we're all in line with that expectation as we coach our principals and talk them through their options.
Can
Thank you very much.
jump in just a second, because I want to pick up on something that Mrs. Hassan said. And there's the positive behavior strategies and all that, and I believe in that too, and I think that's definitely what we want to be doing. But the other thing I heard you allude to, and I just want to reiterate it to make sure it's heard by the group, is other things that might be going on in that child's life and other assessment that needs to take place to analyze what's going on, whether that's things that we can help with or things that we can't help with. But as you say, when children are misbehaving, it tends to be because something's wrong, and determining what that is, it doesn't always correlate to their behavior. So I guess as we try to figure this whole piece out, I just feel like that's an important thing to emphasize. And then I would ask the question, is that currently going on? Do we have an assessment piece involved in this? Or is that still in development, I guess would be my question.
An assessment piece with.
Well, I'm just, how are we assessing what's going on with these kids? I mean, we can discipline them, we can put them in timeout, we can send them to the principal's office, we can write them up, we can move them into a different class, we can do all these things. But how are we trying to figure out what's going on with the child and why they're having trouble?
I would say to you, I do not believe there is a formal process of assessing, at least from that angle. There is not. But the next piece, when we share with you kind of one of the strategies that we're wanting to look at, it involves more of that getting to the root cause. And then we'll explain that in just a second. But as far as a formal process, to my knowledge, I don't know, Dr. Hill? Maybe there's something.
As you know, we're doing a program review for special education and RTI, and just recently visited a school system, and it was quite informative, actually. And one of the things that we saw that our team was very excited about was support being offered at the campus for a period of time prior to removal, for discretionary type removals. And the district we visited was having some of the same issues that we were having, and working with an expert from Vanderbilt University who also specializes in PBIS. So I think that there will be, as we go through our program review and so forth, some improvements will be as far as at the campus level. And you're right, RTI is not where we would like for it to be, but I think that you can look at some of the in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension progress that we've made, and I think that things are much better now than they were, but we're not there, and there are things that we still need to do to improve. And we'll be working on some of those things next year and bringing you some of those improvements.
Thank you. Mrs. Tosan, do you have another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of expand on that a little bit, because one of the things I did when I was asking the question, I was asking, and she articulated it better than I did when I was asking about how are we looking at mental health issues, are we looking at the other social issues? Because we have a lot of resources in our community that we can tap into that can help us with that assessment process, whether you're bringing in social workers or Mental Health America or some of these other organizations that provide those services. And, that's something I would encourage us to look into, because they can provide that for us, and I know would be willing to provide some of that for us, because that's something that they would like to be involved with, is helping youth, especially youth that's at risk. So that's just a suggestion, just to follow up on that.
It's been a few minutes, so you might not remember, but you asked me something that I didn't answer, so I'm going to answer it really quickly. When they go back, do we just punt them back to the home campus? No. When a student completes a DAEP, they must go through another IST, Instructional Support Team transition meeting, and there's actually a form that I require them to complete. The parent, student counselor, and administrator meet, talk about the interventions that will go on now for the transition.
Sorry, ma'am, you have to hold your question, send it in, or wait till the audience at the items at the very end of the meeting. Yes. Go ahead, Dr. Moat-Williams.
We have been leading into this slide called restorative discipline. Restorative discipline is a particular form of working with students that, you want to address this a little bit?
Well, Dr. Garcia is here, and this is kind of her initiative that she's going to be bringing forward. So, Dr. Garcia, if you'd like to say a few words about this.
Yes, I would love to. It's very passionate about this. So, Madam President and board members, this is not another program. This is a way of thinking, a frame of reference in how to deal with students. Ms. Tosan has asked some very good questions about how we deal with students. Do we have a process? Do we have a model? Do we have a framework, a way of thinking? And this is exactly what this is. And before I go over this slide, I was jotting some notes as Dr. McWilliams was doing her presentation. And I noticed the first slide talked about our mission statement. Our mission statement implies that we are a caring organization. So if we're a caring organization, then our specific practices should be caring habits. And this is what this is going to lead into. The other thing that we strive for is caring about students, not just in instruction, but in the way they grow in terms of their soft skills and their own habits. We talk about differentiated instruction, but we don't often talk about differentiated discipline for those needs and what those children's needs are. And before I actually go over this slide, I want to say that I learned a lot when I went to the Saturday workshop that Mrs. Bassan's organization, Father's Joy Presents, and there was a gentleman there that did an incredible presentation on PBIS. Well, PBIS is the same as Champs and Foundations, okay? I want you to know that originally there were two gentlemen who started Positive Behavior Support Systems, and one of them was more altruistic than the other. And one of them decided to continue to call it PBIS, and it's free on the web and not with hands-on training, but it's free. And another one decided that this was really a great thing, and he could train school districts and charge money and make it a money-making organization, and that's called Champs and Foundations. But basically, the theory is the same, but they do come in and do all the training for you, so the district doesn't have to do it by themselves. So we do have PBIS, which is very, very important. And I only say that because before you start talking about restorative discipline, you have to have some foundations in place, and that is about expectations of kids, like PBIS or Champs and Foundations. So again, it's not a program, it's a philosophy which to draw from. Another slide that Dr. McWilliams showed was a slide where it had relationships. Well, this kind of changes the restorative discipline changes the focus from rules to relationships. And when we work with students or anybody, our spouses, our friends, our neighbors, we're all interacting. And in all these interactions, we're either draining a relationship or we're gaining in the relationship. So either draining or gaining. And so what we want to focus on is we want to have our teachers work from a philosophical standpoint where we are gaining in the relationship between the student and the teacher or the staff. And actually, restorative discipline enhances responsibility. Ms. Tassan also asked, how do we know if there's something going on with these students? We do have LSSPs that observe the students. We have nationally board certified behavior specialists that observe the students. But in this case, we also have this model that we are bringing forth, philosophy that we want to implement beginning with middle school and beginning with only the 6th grade. So next year, what we're proposing to do is every 6th grade campus will implement or adopt the philosophy of restorative discipline, and then each year we'll at the 7th grade, and the next year the 8th grade. But we will begin with it where people can feel a sense of comfort dealing with it, because this is a huge paradigm shift. Because normally when a student gets in trouble, what we say is, what rule was broken, as you see on the slide? What rule did you break? Did you look at your code of conduct? Who did it? What is the punishment? So we shift from what rule was broken to what actually happened and who did it to who was affected. If I broke a rule, someone was affected. Another student, myself, the teacher. What is the punishment to what are we going to do to make things right? And the student who broke the rule is not, there can be a punishment, but the focus is the student comes to understand the harm that caused and must repair that relationship. And so it actually focused not just on the person who broke the rule, but also on the person that was harmed or the person who made the mistake. So we are moving forth, hopefully, to train 6th grade, and what we would like to do is have the principals come up with 3 areas where they will use restorative discipline in. And one of them that I think is almost non-negotiable needs to be truancy. I think that all middle school principals, 6th grade, when we deal with students in truancy, that we will go through a restorative discipline practice. The other one could be, we'll let them choose, but we're going to be meeting with them and dialoguing with them, could be tardies. Okay? So we can talk about truancy, tardies, fights. But again, when we talk about restorative discipline, we're talking about not the mandated disciplinary actions that we have to take, but the discretionary. So it is a system that has its roots in the Mennonite, among the Mennonite people, and even further back, the American Indians and the Quakers, and talking and dialoguing to restore something that was lost, and in this terms, the behavior, the good behavior.
So in conclusion, then about this section of our presentation, and going forward in terms of student discipline and the OCR review, in the summer of 2014, we tried to get the OCR to take a big, long 35-page plan that's still sitting there, and we weren't successful on getting them to take the plan, but that's okay. We're implementing the plan anyway. And so this is just a summary slide of the strategies that are being used in terms of working on student discipline and student behaviors. So that brings us to truancy. And you see these kids here are at school, and that's what we got to have. We got to have our students at schools because they're not learning if they're not at school. So we say missing school matters. It does matter so much. If we think about our own kids, not only are they losing out on the learning, but they're losing out on the social development opportunities every day. And we know that students with high levels of absenteeism are more likely to drop out. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Truancy, here's the deal, and you can see the slide here with the laws quoted, but truancy, it's not subjective or discretionary. It is the law. Of course, how we reach out to kids and families is part of the discretionary area, and we need to work to improve upon that. But the truancy laws state that if you're 6 to 17 years old, that you must go to public or private school or be homeschooled. And that's where we get into some of these questions lately with the media and so forth. We realize that, because of the truancy laws, there can be unintended consequences that affect some families more than others. We can have truancy that is aligned with economically disadvantaged kids and so forth. We see that. So I think it's important that we really walk through the whole truancy process. I do have here tonight, I just want to introduce real quickly, one of our 3 student attendance specialists, Erin Miller, is here tonight, who works with these kids tremendously well. So there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what happens when a kid is absent. So let's walk through it. The first thing that happens is anytime a kid is absent, anytime a student is absent, whether it's for one period, for half a day, or all day, that there's an automated phone call that goes out. And then after each absence, we changed it this year, the parent has 5 days to provide a note to excuse the absence. Then, upon the 5th unexcused absence, or 3 unexcused absences in a 4-week period, a truancy warning letter is mailed. So you got an automated phone call. You got 5 days to bring an absence. And then if you get up to 5 unexcused, then you get into the warning letter. After the truancy warning letter is sent, if the student has an additional 3 unexcused absences in a 4-week period, then a truancy diversion program, a TDP letter, is mailed. And let's talk about TDP. We're going to talk about it extensively in a minute, but not only is a letter mailed saying that they need to go to the TDP, but a reminder phone call goes out to the parent or guardian on the Friday prior to the TDP, which is always held on a Wednesday. And the student receives a reminder in writing at the school about the TDP. So, I want to say that with truancy diversion being integrated into the Department of Student Affairs just a year ago, we do believe that the systems and procedures have been strengthened. However, we know and we admit that we need to go back to the source of the problem, and that is the kids at the campus. When a kid is absent, we need to find out what's going on at the campus before it gets to a warning letter and truancy diversion and so forth. We need to actually connect with the kids and with the moms and dads, and that's what we need to, we admit we need to work on more. I want to talk to you about the TDP, the Truancy Diversion Program. I encourage you to come. It's on most Wednesday mornings at 8:30 in Wheeler Fieldhouse. Prior to coming into the Department of Student Affairs, it was long and arduous, I would say. It was about 3 hours. It is now less than an hour long, but in that hour presentation, we do review the law. We discuss excused versus unexcused absences, consequences if the truancy continues, and then support services. How can we help? So in continuing what happens when a kid is absent. So if the student attends the TDP, then there is no truancy complaint. Nothing goes forward. It's canceled. If the student doesn't go to TDP, and I'm going to show you the data on that in a minute, then the student attendance specialist, which a lot of people call truancy officers, automatically reschedule. So now you're at the point of TDP and you miss it. Well, we still don't send you to truancy court. We give you another chance. We reschedule. So then if you still don't go, then at that point, a complaint is filed with truancy court. Also, it's important to note that once a student reaches 10 unexcused absences in any 6-month period, whether they've been to TDP or not, a truancy court complaint is filed. Let's talk about some of the truancy.
Can I stop you just for a second
Sure,
before we go on?
sure.
I like all the changes that you've made to the truancy program since you started the Student Affairs Department. Can you just give us a date of when those went into?
I could probably give you so
When
many
did-
dates you wouldn't want to hear.
But when did you, I know you've been
Department of Student
improving.
Affairs began in August of 13. In
Okay.
January of 2014, truancy was added. Truancy was added to the Department of Student Affairs. In May of 2004, we studied truancy all last semester. In May of 2014, I came to the board with quite a long presentation and a report about all our recommendations, for which you approved all of those.
So
less-
anything before that, they fell under the,
Safe and secure
oh,
schools.
thank
With the
you.
old plan.
The
what
old
you're
plan.
saying is-
And I'm going to show you some data in a minute that are
Okay.
going to kind of, and, you know, I think data causes us to ask questions. The questions you have, they're going to kind of be played out in the data as well. So, real quickly, I'd like to talk about some truancy improvement strategies, kind of like Ms. Bailey's talking about. What are we doing this year? More involvement on the campuses by the student attendance specialists and by the bail probation officers. By the way, we do have one of the Saved by the Bell probation officers with us tonight. John Butte is here with us as well. So we got these guys working together more. So we added attendance intervention team meetings. These weren't going on, and we actually have forums that we do actual meetings now out on campuses with the truancy officers. And they also have the campus administrators, social workers, and the counselors. And these are for their chronic truants, the chronic truants. We added dropout specialists to Bush High School, Marshall High School, and Willowridge. We went, this was a pretty key one, we went from 2 to 5 days, allowing parents to bring the notes. We know that we improved the TDP, the Truancy Diversion Program. And then we added that automatic reschedule once a TDP is missed for the first time. So let's look at some data about the TDP, the Truancy Diversion Program. What I can say to you is that the TDP works, and that is a unique program. Fort Bend ISD has this as a unique program. And that is, in most school districts in the state of Texas, if you have 10 unexcused absences, if you violate the law, you're going to the court. In Fort Bend ISD, we have an intervention, a really keen intervention called TDP, or the Truancy Diversion Program. So if we look at the data, here's the deal. These are the data from this year, from the fall, from the first semester. And it's kind of hard to see, but 70% of the kids went to TDP. And then if you look at the slide on the right side, it's just, and Dr. Whitberg brought this up, so we pulled the data to show it's working. 69% of the kids then, 60% of the kids who go to TDP, they're done. We get their attention and they're done. So that's what these data are showing. 70% of the kids go to TDP. It's an intervention we provide. And of those kids who go, 60% of them don't go any further. They're done. They never go any further. Let's talk about Saved by the Bell just a minute. The Saved by the Bell program comes about with the kids then who end up in truancy court. So if the student doesn't go to TDP, or continues with truancy concerns and violating a law, then the next step may involve the truancy court assigning the student to Saved by the Bell. When a student appears in truancy court, the judge has the option to assign the kid to this program called Saved by the Bell. The focus of Saved by the Bell is to get kids back into school and to graduate. The JPOs, the juvenile probation officers, work collaboratively with the student attendance officers, the police officers on campus, and the campus staff. There is a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, with the Saved by the Bell program that began in 2012, and it expires this summer. So I won't be here, but you'll have to decide about that, and we would highly encourage you to keep this program up. It is working. I'll give you a little bit about the MOU. The Fort Bend ISD provides $300,000 a year to the Saved by the Bell program officers, to the Saved by the Bell program. That $300,000 pays for the juvenile probation officers, a Fort Bend ISD police officer serve as a bailiff in the truancy court, and the operation of the truancy court. Let me give you a little bit more data and then some data on the Saved by the Bell. And the juvenile probation officers, we have 5 of them working through the Saved by the Bell program. And you can see that we hear a lot about the Saved by the Bell. I want to talk to you about that bottom line number, 107. So today, as we sit here, there are 107 kids in Fort Bend ISD under the Saved by the Bell program, working with probation officers like John Boutte. So if you look at that and you hear in the media, oh, there's so many of these kids falling in this program, it's less than 1% of our kids are in this Saved by the Bell program, which is a program to help them come to school and graduate. Here's some more data from Saved by the Bell that kind of starts glaring at you. If you look at these data show the Saved by the Bell students by campus. And you can kind of see that Marshall High School is an outlier. 42 of the 107 kids on Saved by the Bell are at Marshall High School. I would like to say that we are continuing to work with Marshall High School. We believe the new leadership team at Marshall High School will continue to focus on academic improvement, climate, and culture. We need to take a more assertive approach with Marshall High School with several different areas in terms of truancy. And one of them I want to share a piece of data with you is we send these truancy warning letters, or our student attendance specialists go out to find these kids, and they don't live at the houses. They're not zoned to Fort Bend ISD. So here's a piece of data for you. 53 kids, we got a report, we get these reports from Marshall because we say, hey, these kids, we're sending them letters and it's coming back. 53 kids in the month of January that we determined don't live in the Marshall zone. So we're beginning to work more closely and be more assertive with Marshall High School in assisting with items like that. And what's going to happen is they're going to have to be withdrawn. And so we may end up with a problem of a dropout and so forth, but we're hoping that they certainly enroll in the school where they go. But these are some reasons that Marshall is an outlier. There are too many kids that don't go there that we're working with Marshall on. And Marshall, through Cosette Church, the principal, today sent me a fabulous plan that they are working on to find these kids who don't live there and to work with these truant kids. So this is Saved by the Bell by campus. We do see, and of my student attendance specialists, I would tell you that Erin Miller is the most assertive and works with Marshall High School.
I just want to interject, too, as we are looking very closely at Marshall, because as you see, that lion's share there is troubling to all of us, and working with Marla Shepard and Dr. Hill's group as a team, we're going to be looking, and you used a very kind word, assertive, and I'm going to almost say aggressive, because we know that we've got to look at some very intense solutions, and that's what we intend to do. And for example, in all transparency, we have attendance issues with staff at Marshall High School. Children need to see effective role models that are consistent in their lives, and that adds to those relationships that we talk about in building that environment that's going to make them desire to be at school. So we have a lot of work to do, but just know that is very high on radar, and there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work and conversation to see how much more we can do in that particular school.
The next piece of data on the Saved by the Bell, these are the kids working with the juvenile probation age. And of the 107 kids in Saved by the Bell, 74% are 15 and 16-year-olds. Let's look at a truancy comparison. I think Ms. James brought up, where have we come, what does it look like, and so forth. This particular slide shows that we continue to see decreases in truancy actions. And when we say truancy actions, we have the warning letters, the TD referrals, and the valid truancy complaints, which are the ones who go to truancy court. And if you look at these data, what we see is we're on track this year to continue to see a decrease, and we would, if we stay steady, because we have up here the fall, that last little light blue is the fall of 2014. So even if they doubled, we're looking at a 20% decrease of the valid complaints, 20% decrease, 20% less kids going to truancy court this year than did last year. And I think that it's the continuation of the improvements of the interventions. Let's get into something else that's been in the news quite a bit lately, so we're going to just go ahead and share it here, and that is truancy complaints when we look at it in an analysis by race. I think it's always important to share good news, so I would tell you that if you look at this slide, on the left is students receiving truancy complaints, and on the right is the actual percentage of kids by race in Fort Bend ISD. So here's the good news. There's one group that's pretty much aligned. Hispanics make up 25% of Fort Bend ISD and 27% of the truancy. So I wanted to start with that good news, that the Hispanics are pretty well aligned. That's supposed to make you laugh. Okay, good. But then we do need to go ahead and own it and talk about that there's a discrepancy. 29% of Fort Bend ISD is African American students, and then 47% of our truancy is African American students. Here's a slide that shows you, this table really breaks it down in terms of the racial truancy complaints by race. And so if you look at this thing, what you see again are Marshall and high school. With Marshall and high school, 891, if you look on the far right bottom, 891 African Americans in the fall received a truancy complaint. And of that 891, 44% came from Willow Ridge and Marshall. So again, we're seeing that we have these concerns. We're continuing to work with these schools. That 891 is the 891 is the number of African American kids in the fall who got a truancy complaint. And then this slide, if you go back and look at it later and whatnot, shows that if we wanted to pick at Elkins High School, we see that Elkins has 22 African American complaints, 9 Hispanic complaints, and 10 white.
But it's 424 African American.
Out of the
891 is the total.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. 800, I'm so sorry. 424 of the 891, 48% of the referrals to truancy court are right at 49% of African Americans, but our student population reflects 29% African American. Your turn.
Okay. I just want to kind of pull in and wrap up some of the data and where we're going from this point forward. But I do want to tell you that Dr. Carlson, who will be taking Rhonda's place in this position, and I both attended the truancy diversion class. And we sat in the audience, incognito, of course, and listening, watching, observing the actual class itself. And when we did that, we had some interesting takeaways. For one thing, I want to compliment Dr. McWilliams and her team for the quality of the class. It was less than 1 hour. I understand it used to be 3 hours. I cannot imagine anyone sitting in Wheeler for 3 hours. But it moved rapidly, and yet it said what it needed to say. How do you get the note? What do you need to do? Use email. You have a paper, you have a trail. Gave them details and specifics and told them what's going to happen if you don't turn this around. But the most important piece, I thought, was that there's also a distribution of social workers. And there's a list. This is your school. Here's who you call. If you have a family issue going on, if there's financial hardship causing you not to be able to get to school, you're taking care of a younger brother, those types of things. Here's who you call. And so to me, I was pleasantly surprised to see that that compassionate piece and that how do we assist you piece was hooked in with the teeth behind the law that says you need to do it. And consequently, we have 60% of the people that once they go to that class, as Rhonda pointed out, that's it. They've had their remediation and that they don't see the courts again. But moving forward and sharing some other things that I want you to know about where we're headed. I do want to point out, I heard recently in some media request, that we had a disconnect between the information that is being sent in the Saved by the Bell and the Truancy program and Skyward. Those two don't talk, so the system has been that the Department of Student Affairs would send out the information. So if I'm a principal, I receive a report. It says these 25 children need to be entered into Skyward under these codes for their absences. Well, some did, some didn't. So we realized that wasn't the best way of going about business. So we've hired a temporary employee, and that department will completely enter the data for the campuses. They'll still inform the campuses that these are the kids that you need to watch, but they're going to enter the data. And so, and as we work with Lisa Mears' team, they're also looking at how can that just automatically happen with Skyward. And so they're working on that bridge so that in the future we may just have it automated. But right now we're making sure that we are connecting it manually from the central office level. We will continue to redefine the truancy strategies, and as we point out, some schools may need a little more. Some schools may need something that's different, and that's still okay, and that's still fair. So we'll be analyzing all of that. We mentioned the MOU that'll be coming your way sometime in the next month or two to consider the Saved by the Bell program, and we will highly recommend that because we do believe that even though it's a small percentage of children, that it's making a difference. We want to share with you that our Community Relations Department is working very much to launch a public awareness campaign. How do we really motivate kids and excite kids about coming to school? And so we know that they're gifted at helping us with those types of tools, and so we're looking forward to that. I wanted to point out a particular training, and I guess I would almost say just an enlightenment, for lack of a better word. This is very near and dear to my heart, and I know to Nancy Porter's, as we've discussed this, we will be sharing this with all of the leadership in Fort Bend and the April meeting that we have. But basically, the 40 developmental assets is research-based from the Search Institute, and it aligns what types of attributes does a child need to have or people in their lives that are going to make it more likely that they are successful and productive citizens and that they're happy in their lives. And so when you look at those, like for example, one of them is having a caring neighborhood. Okay, another one that's is having adults in the community who value youth. Some of them are very school-specific about the type of learning we provide. Another one, though, might be that young person accepts personal responsibility. So there are 40 assets. The more of those 40 you have, the more likely you are to graduate and to be a productive member of society. We're going to be working on that recognition of what this is and actually going to our communities with it as well, because a lot of it is something that our families can help us with. And so kind of in wrapping up the information that's been shared, you see that circle of all of the important players that really help us to get to the needs of the child. But when you think about them, we've had a lot of data, but each one of those numbers represent a child who has a story. And that story's got to be heard. First and foremost at the campus, and how do we help support that? And how do we help bridge those families? We have some disparity that we've pointed out. How do we get to the root of what causes that? And how do we support those families? And that is very much a part of our mission. And as you see there, the engagement in our lessons, having high expectations for all kids, making our environment equitable, and building those relationships. So, kind of in closing, just know that deeper study and that deeper recognition of what's important as we move forward is going to make a difference, and we really believe that it will. And I know that Dr. Carlson will step in, and she, with her compassion and her work ethic and her knowledge, will continue with the good work that we've been doing. But we do think it's important that we listen. We will be having community dialogues. We're working on some timelines right now to go out into our community to listen. What do you need from us? How can we help improve in these areas? And so, I think that's the best closing is having that listening heart. And I will tell you that when I was a principal and I ran a high school that was nearly 4,000 kids, one of our slogans that we always said is "Big School, Warm Heart." So we have to care about each child, no matter how big we are. And it's really that way with 72,000 kids in Fort Bend ISD. Big district, warm heart. And we're going to work on these things together. So, and we'll answer any questions, anything that we can further help.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you for that report. That was a really excellent summary. I appreciate all that information. And we will miss you. Back on the page with student support initiatives, I wanted to see if you could give us an example where you said that some of these programs are applied inconsistently. And I wanted to see if you could just offer an example of that.
Champs and foundations, to be honest with you, I mean, some schools totally embrace champs, and the data surrounding the kids' discipline at the school and so forth show it. An example might be a middle school that totally embraces champs in the common areas. And so you might go into a middle school where you can clearly see champs strategies going on in the cafeteria at lunch. And you will see in the student behaviors the implementation with fidelity of champs in that common area. And then you might go visit another middle school and see no or very little of the champ strategies being used. Does that help?
So you think that's a leadership issue, that either the training's not there or just some people don't value it as much, or what do you think the cause of that is?
Combination would be my guess. I would think it's a combination. Some people have their own ideas that they bring forward, and they're successful with other methods. But this is one that the district has adopted. And so even if you frame it with your own personality, and principals tend to bring their personality to the table, often in the way in which they lead the school. And I think there's room for that. They need to have that autonomy and originality, but there's got to be some foundation that we can speak a common language. And so we're working on tightening that. So we do expect to see it.
Is training and the training models.
Let me just say that 2 weeks ago, we developed a rubric for the implementation of CHAMPS to see what level of fidelity it was at every campus. And the first thing we did is we sent it to our campus, liaison, the administrator, to do a self-assessment to rate themselves where they think they are. And the next step is we're already deploying some of our nationally certified behavior specialists to go through the campus, do a walkthrough, and fill out the rubric. Then we're going to put them side by side to see how they think they're implementing it and what we saw. And we're going to start working with the principals. And I really do feel like, because I have in my previous life implemented this program, that PBIS really works when it's implemented with fidelity. And schools that were doing it saw huge reduction in discipline referrals, but it's got to be implemented with fidelity, and you have to have buy-in. In our district, when this was deployed, it was deployed that everyone would do this, and we began training. In my previous life, we would go in and meet with the faculty, and if there wasn't at least 80% on board with the faculty, and the administrators would say, "You're not ready." And we'd go back again, "You're not ready," convince them until that leadership could convince, because we didn't want to give the program a bad name either. So once they were convinced that they were ready, or that we were convinced that we're ready, we went full speed ahead in training, and we are continuing to do training in our district.
All right, Mr. George?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the same thing, and I appreciate this information. It's wonderful. There is a lot of information. And also, I was sitting here and thinking what Dr. Whitback mentioned, it is a lot of information, a lot of maybe a pie chart and all that stuff, but it is a student. And thank you for saying that. And it is the life of a student, a story to be created for our future. And I see that there is a lot of things we are doing, a lot of, I'm excited to see that we are thinking in this direction. But one thing concerns me is that when anything we look into, we see a lot of inconsistencies across our campuses. And I think we all, who are discussing, we all acknowledge that. And my thing is, and also you mentioned something like, creating a rubric and, things like that, so that find out how we are improving, which direction we are going. But I think I feel like we need to do a better job. I mean, because, and I know that we all have that heart, that one child. And, I highly, highly appreciate or continue to see that mindset moving forward so that we implement these programs. I don't think we have any lack of programs or lack of initiative, but why or how we implement that across the board, and that should be a concern, and that should be a concern for all of us, so that we will do a good job moving forward. And that's it. Thank you.
Mr. George and all of you, if I could just say really quickly, there is a TDP this week, right? If you want to see, I don't go to the TDP programs on Wednesdays much because every time I go, I get a broken heart. They suck me in. The kids and parents break my hearts. If you want to see what's been all in the news lately in terms of kids in truancy and what the parents look like and what the stories are about, I encourage you. Go to Wheeler Fieldhouse Wednesday morning at 8:30. Stay 30 minutes or so. But if you're like me, it'll break your heart. And then you want to work with them and you want to help. So I just wanted to say that if you really want to see it, if you want to touch it, go see. Wednesdays at 8:30, right down the street at Wheeler Fieldhouse.
All right. We already want to help, Dr. McWilliams. We want to help every kid. Mrs. Tossan, do you have a question? As your light is on.
Yes, I have a couple questions. First of all, to piggyback on Mr. Rosenthal's comment, I had the same exact thing written down. And I was going to say thank you, Dr. Garcia, for coming up and explaining restorative discipline and talking about CHAMPS and PBIS and that kind of thing. Because one of my comments was going to be that implementation is our problem. So CHAMPS is nice language and great, pretty fluffy words that mean nothing if we're not doing anything in the classroom with it. And I think you're absolutely right that there are some campuses and some classrooms where it's being done really well and some where it's not being done really well. And, I heard you say that in where you had been in a previous life, before you got to Fort Bend ISD, that you go in and evaluate whether or not leadership's ready for this kind of thing. And I would just say, as a person that's sitting here volunteering on this board because I care about every student in this district, we need to be ready for it. Because we have too much going on with the OCR complaints and the in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions. We have too much going on in truancy. We have too many kids that, and I'll just say it again, that I feel like are falling through the cracks because these, interventions that we have at our disposal and at our fingertips are not actually being implemented in the classroom. And I just feel really strongly that there's no excuse for that. We just, part of education and part of our jobs is caring about kids and making sure they're in the classroom in order to be able to learn. And so I just feel really strongly about that. But I appreciate you coming up and explaining that and helping us to better understand what's happening and what you guys are going to be doing to address it with the rubric, because that was going to be my question. Is I heard Dr. Mitt Williams say that they weren't being implemented with fidelity, and so my question was, how are we addressing that to make sure that they are? So thank you for that. One of my basic questions is, does the law define what's excused and what's not, or do we have discretion in determining what's an excused absence and what's not?
That's a really good question. Yes, and excused absences truancy is not involved with excused absences. If a student is sick, if the student goes to the doctor, it is in the student parent handbook, we outline what is an excused absence. Then we have kind of some, to be honest with you, what the policy and procedure says is that it's the principal's call, that the principal makes a final decision. Well, this year we also implemented and we added our attendance specialist, provided like some items that should be considered for excused, and if there is any gray area, we encourage the principals to call. We encourage the principals to call. You might not know that things like my child who's a senior in high school can go twice this year to visit colleges, and it's excused and it doesn't count against exemptions. They are defined in the student parent handbook. Here's the problem so many times, is that the parent doesn't send the note. If my child, and I'm just as guilty as this can be, if my child has the flu and misses 3 days of school, I've got 5 days to send in a note. We also encourage the principals to extend beyond that, even if there's extenuating circumstances.
That'd be my next question. So, and I think that that's where some of the community concern comes in, is where we do have discretion on what's excused and what's not. Are we erring on the side of punishing children through the truancy process versus being more lenient and allowing some of those absences be qualified as excused versus unexcused? So that's why I asked the question, because I think that's where we kind of get a little sticky in this area, is how hard is Fort Bend ISD being? How hard a line are we taking on excused versus unexcused? Because you were talking numbers earlier, and the numbers look big that are being published compared to other districts our size. So my next question was going to be is, why do we look so out of whack when you look at those numbers? Because I see the numbers that you've presented, and the percentages seem small. We looked at 107 in Saved by the Bell, but overall numbers of kids going through TDP and I guess receiving some of those letters and things like that. So why do those numbers look so big? And is there anything we can do to take this discretionary piece of excused versus unexcused and maybe tighten that up a little bit and make some headway there?
I think that I've asked that question over and over in the last year about why are Fort Bend ISD truancy numbers like they are, and it might not be that way in different districts. And what I've been told, and I think what I'm kind of seeing, is Fort Bend ISD does follow the law in terms of truancy. Now, in terms of the discretionary versus non-discretionary, I think that's part of, you can see just an actual decline every year that the truancy program has been enforced. The automated truancy program here is that we continue to encourage the principals to look at the child, the reason, the family, to extend the time and so forth. We do, if it gets to the Department of Student Affairs with these student attendance specialists, we always encourage the leaders to err on the side of the kid in terms of the discretionary or unexcused versus excused absence.
And I appreciate that, and I do think that, I think we have all had, or maybe even personally aware of situations where, we're not talking about kids that genuinely have an issue with truancy and are not coming to class. If they don't come to class, they don't learn. We all know that 98% of inmates, you know, they got there because it started with truancy. I mean, we know those numbers, but I think at the same time, you know, we have to look at the student. It has to be more individualized, and we have to look a little bit more at what's really going on there. That would be my only comment. My last question is, you said something about connecting with the students, and I guess, you know, my last comment kind of leads into that. What plans do we have to connect more with the students at the campus level to see what's really going on and how we can address that from a truancy perspective?
From a truancy perspective, I think that we, I was going to say, when it gets to the Department of Student Affairs and our officers and whatnot, we handle it well, and we do connect with the kids. But here's the problem. It's before it gets to us. It's that first unexcused absence, second unexcused absence, third unexcused absence. It's that high school kid where the administrator really needs to dig down and go, well, yeah, you got 10 unexcused absences, but they're all fifth period. Obviously, you're taking 2 lunches. It's the digging down at the campus level and finding out what's going on there. And that's the part that I think that Dr. Whitbeck, Dr. Garcia, Dr. Hill and I are all saying, you know, the developmental assets, the restorative discipline, the trainings that we've got to actually get going.
Well, and I think having staff that really cares about that, because what
Yeah.
you just described was my daughter. She was taking 2 lunches. And we needed somebody to get out and figure out what was happening, what was she doing, we finally figured it out and, you know, put some things in place to help it. But it's having that staff that cares enough to go and find out instead of just writing down that they're absent, sending the truancy letter and not actually connecting with the student or the parent. So that was the purpose of my question.
I think we have a difficult task between balancing building relationships, listening, getting to the root of the problem that we want to do, and also knowing the buck has to stop somewhere, and there's some responsibility that's got to go back to the home and to the student, especially when the student is at secondary level. So, for example, if we're going to Disney World in October because we can get a better rate, that's unacceptable. And yet that would be 5 absences if I went to Disney World in October. So we have compassion, but at the same time, we have reality. We're not there, we're not learning. So that's not our purpose. And so I don't mean to sound like, you know, but you get where I'm going. We have to balance all those things if we're late always to first period, because maybe our family needs to change some ways in which we're going about our business in the morning. So we want to help support, but there is a balance there, and we have to kind of keep trying to find that perfect balance.
Thanks to all of you, because this is really good information, and of course, it's very timely. And Dr. McWilliams, thank you for your service.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, I'd just like to say thank you. I appreciate the student support initiatives, helping to reduce, working towards reducing the amount of class time that our kids are missing for disciplinary issues. But I heard clearly that we've got to have effective leadership on our campuses. It sounds like we need to start with making sure we have the right kids enrolled at some campuses. And then we've got to make sure that if these are the things we say we're going to do in Fort Bend ISD, then the leadership is appropriately trained to do those things. And if we don't have the leadership, the staff trained and willing to do it, then it's not going to be effective. We're going to have everybody going in different directions, and we're not going to help our students, which is the reason that we're here tonight looking at this in the first place, is because we want to help our students. So that's my speech. My voice seems to be going, even though I didn't do much talking. Dr. McWilliams, thank you very much for bringing this presentation to us tonight. Thank you for your hard work over the last couple of years with the Department of Student Affairs and putting it all together, organizing it, making it systematic. That's what we're all about here, putting systems in place for success for all of our kids, and we appreciate you and we appreciate all of your hard work, so thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you very much, Rhonda.
It's been my honor. I'd like to take, in 18 years, I'm going to take like a couple of minutes and just tell you my story about truancy. I told you that pretty much everybody in here, you have kids, and you have kids in Fort Bend ISD, and I do too. So I'm going to tell you about why I don't go to the TDP anymore, and they're going to laugh at this. Every time I would go, I would get sucked in and my heart would get broken, and I would do everything I could to help. Okay, well, here's, there was this kid at Marshall High School, and his grandmother, it was after the TDP was over, and she brought me over with Aaron and was going on and on and on, the grandmother. And I'm going to call him Charles. Let's say his name is Charles. Charles this and Charles that and Charles this, and I need help with Charles. And I totally agreed, and I totally agreed. And he was just sitting there with headphones on and didn't really seem to care. So finally I said, Charles, what do you like? What is something that I could bring you that you would like if you would come to Marshall High School tomorrow? He goes, donuts. I said, okay, I'll see you tomorrow at Marshall High School. So I looked at my calendar, I did whatever, I rearranged or whatever, and this is hilarious. So I got out to Marshall, I didn't get out there till like second period, and I went to the attendance office to find out what class he was in, and the attendance officer, the attendance clerk literally just laughed me out of the office. There is no way Charles is here, he never comes to school. That's what she told me. So but said, if you think he's here, here's his class. So we walked down there to class, and he was there, and I was so proud of myself. So I had brought him, what was it, like three donuts. I had brought him donuts, and he was so excited. I gave him his donuts, right? So I'm so proud of myself, and I'm thinking I've had this great effect on Charles's life. So that afternoon, I come back in the office and whatnot, and Erin just mentions to me that she pulled back up to Charles's attendance, and that was the only period he was there that day. But you know what I had to say about that is God bless Charles, he was there that day, first and second period. But that's why I don't go to TDP anymore.
You should have came later in the day.
Well, I just would wrap this up by saying I really appreciate Rhonda's work on this. She and Christy have worked very hard the last several weeks to put this together because it is an important and timely update that we wanted the board to be able to engage in. Because there's a lot going on around us, and we want you to be fully informed and engaged in this important issue. But I would point out that one of the reasons that Rhonda's been able to do such a good job on this is because the board last year actually approved as one of the board priorities that we have systems to address this kind of thing. So, you know, we've touched several times about the fact we're struggling with consistency, we're struggling with systems. And that's one of the biggest issues we face. It's indicative of the organization that we're trying to fine-tune now, is to bring alignment to all of our systems so that at every school, these things are happening the way they should. And Rhonda has been essential in that through her leadership with principals and assistant principals, that's going to continue now because the board has set forth a goal and a priority that we will have systems surrounding this type of thing, and that's what's driving our work. So it really, truly is a team effort all the way, like I always say, from the boardroom to the classroom. And so we appreciate your support in this, and please don't hesitate to let us know how we can provide you additional information and support as you hear things or as you read things that concern you.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. We will. I think that concludes our information items for tonight, and now the board's ready to convene in closed session under the Texas Open Meetings Act for the purpose of private consultation with the board's attorney and for personnel matters. The board's now convened in closed session.